Hello, and welcome to this discussion on the Romantics, which is a very significant period in British literature. I know that the minute we talk about romance and romantics, it immediately piques your interest, doesn't it? Especially youngsters. But what exactly does romantic mean? Usually, when we think about romance and romantic, we think about things like love and Valentine's Day, maybe, but it is also much more than that, don't you think? So, what we will do today is take you through this period, try to do a review of what it means, what is the literature, specifically the poetry that belonged to the Romantic era in British literature, really do to the readers. What did the poets want to convey through their poetry when they were writing in the Romantic tradition? So let us begin with that today. And let us look at how Romanticism and the real world intersect at many places. Sometimes they separate, sometimes they cross each other in various ways. And it has frequently been said that Romanticism actually detaches us from the real world. However, it brings us back to reality at a later point, and we'll see how that happens when we talk about certain poems and certain poets. So let us look at how the poetry of the 19th century, which is the age of the Romantic era, the Romantic tradition, let us see how the poetry of it bears this belief out. First, we need to look at the changes that happened in society. When certain things happen in society, when there are certain revolutions, many changes, like they are happening all the time in this age, in this century, you will see that they never happen in isolation. What happens in society impacts every facet of human life, and it would obviously influence the writing of that age. First, of course, it would influence the thoughts, the ideas, the concepts of the people, the thinking people of that age, which is then expressed through their writing. And it, of course, would affect the music, the art, the paintings that come out during that age would bear those effects as well. So what happened that caused this change? In the earlier age, which is known as the Augustan age, where you had poets like Dryden and Pope, you found that when the writers wrote, it was the urban society which was the milieu. However, the Industrial Revolution had altered a number of things in society. The first thing that happened was that a large number of migrant workers, both uneducated and homeless, came to the towns. And it led to an increase in crime, it led to an increase in homelessness, poverty in the urban areas, and society was viewed as becoming increasingly hypocritical, deceitful, materialistic. And when you see these changes that have occurred in society, as I said, you find the same changes occurring even in the music of the Romantic age. So now there was a difference in the perception. The previous age was now viewed as something which was very narrow and very limited in as far as the range of experience goes. The interests and sentiments that the Augustines professed, which they actually laid rules down for and said that this is what one should be thinking about, this is what one should be writing about, they were seen to be too few. The writers of this new age thought that they needed a more wider range of topics and ideas in which to express themselves. And they felt that the limits of good sense and decency were soon reached. So it needed to be pushed further and further back. So what were the new themes that they wanted to explore? Children's experiences, which had been completely ignored, perhaps. They wanted to talk about people who were remote from cities and the national life. And they also wanted to delve into the unexplored passions of the human heart, of the human mind. They did not want to focus just on reason like the Augustine writers had done. If you remember, the Augustine age was also known as the age of reason. So for the Romantic writers, the reason was not just the focus. They wanted something more because they felt that human beings were composed of both emotions and reason. So they thought that literature should be a vehicle for communicating certain experiences, certain emotions, certain states of feeling which are not possible to be expressed in an explicit statement. These kind of emotions, these kind of feelings needed a different kind of vocabulary, if you will. For instance, Coleridge, in The Ancient Mariner, in Christabel, in Kubla Khan, he brings in exotic, out-of-this-world settings, and the themes also. They are not part of this natural world, and this expects from the reader a willing suspension of disbelief. Now, what is this willing suspension of disbelief? Let me try to explain it to you by giving you an example from something that we see all around us every day, something that's very common in our lives, which is movies. Maybe Hindi movies, maybe regional movies in regional languages, it doesn't matter. You might see a film in which one of the characters perhaps dies, and then suddenly another character appears who looks exactly like him or her. And they are not twins, they are not related in any way at all, and yet they look exactly like each other, they are identical. So we do see these films, we do enjoy those stories, don't we? We do not sit in the cinema theater and say, oh, this is rubbish and how can this ever happen? So what are we doing at that point of time? We are willingly suspending our disbelief. We are willing for that period of time to accept that something of this kind is possible in order to enjoy that story, in order to enjoy that plot. So this is exactly what happens when Coleridge talks about in The Ancient Mariner or in Christabel, when he brings in certain elements which are not part of this everyday reality, we are willingly suspending our disbelief to participate in that narrative. And these poets also wanted to pay attention or focus upon facts which they would say are untainted by reason. That is, they do not want reason to play any part in it at all. Let us illustrate this with something. The Ancient Mariner, which I just mentioned, is a tale of travel and adventure, but at the same time it is a journey into the human psyche as well. Kubla Khan describes a palace in a very exotic setting, in an extremely exotic kind of a locale, but then it goes on to speak about the madness of creativity. Christabel introduces a young girl into the complex world of love, and she is placed amongst elements of the supernatural.
Kublai Khan, or A Vision in a Dream, a Fragment, by Samuel Taylor Coleridge. In Xanadu did Kublai Khan a stately pleasure dome decree, where Alph, the sacred river, ran through caverns measureless to man, down to a sunless sea. So twice 5 miles of fertile ground with walls and towers were girded round, and there were gardens bright with sinuous rills, where blossomed many an incense-bearing tree, and here were forests ancient as the hills, enfolding sunny spots of greenery. But oh, that deep romantic chasm which slanted down the green hill athwart a cedarn cover! A savage place, as holy and enchanted as ere beneath a waning moon was haunted by woman wailing for her demon lover. And from this chasm, with ceaseless turmoil seething, as if this earth in fast thick pants were breathing, a mighty fountain momently was forced, amid whose swift half-intermitted burst huge fragments vaulted like rebounding hail, or chaffy grain beneath the thresher's flail. And mid these dancing rocks, at once and ever, it flung up momently the sacred river. 5 miles, meandering with a mazy motion through wood and dale, the sacred river ran, then reached the caverns measureless to man, and sank in tumult to a lifeless ocean. And mid this tumult Kublai heard from far ancestral voices prophesying war. The shadow of the dome of pleasure floated midway on the waves, where was heard the mingled measure from the fountain and the caves. It was a miracle of rare device, a sunny pleasure dome with caves of ice. A damsel with a dulcimer in a vision once I saw. It was an Abyssinian maid, and on her dulcimer she played, singing of Mount Abora. Could I revive within me her symphony and song, to such a deep delight 'twould win me, that with music loud and long I would build that dome in air, that sunny dome, those caves of ice, and all who heard should see them there, and all should cry, "Beware, beware! His flashing eyes, his floating hair! Weave a circle round him thrice, and close your eyes with holy dread, for he on honey-dew hath fed, and drunk the milk of paradise."
Now, what about Blake and Wordsworth? Blake actually brought out through his creations, through his poetic creations, an entire world, an entire universe of mythical beings. In America, the 4 Zoas, Marriage of Heaven and Hell, the Book of Reason. And he analyzed them on the level of symbols which have validity and meaning. Now, Wordsworth, one could say, was perhaps just the opposite, because he used only the common folk as a subject. So his characters are uncorrupted by what is known as civilization. Now, what was the civilization, which we've already talked about, where society was seen as deceitful and materialistic? So Wordsworth's characters are those who have still not come in touch with this kind of a society. And he likes to portray children's innocence, which have been uncorrupted by an understanding of this deceitful materialistic world. And to illustrate, he has poems like Michael, the Old Cumberland Beggar, and The Girl in We Are 7. Blake's Urizen is the embodiment of conventional reason and law. It represents repression in conflict with the revolutionary spirit. Whereas Wordsworth Michael is about a child who gets corrupted by society. In We Are 7, Wordsworth again, civilization has not reached their world, so they are still uncorrupted. Byron and Shelley, they are part of the same romantic order, but quite different in how they wrote. Byron was sociable. He was not an escapist, as some have estimated. What he wanted to do was, he was a rebel. He wished to fight despotism at all cost, at all levels. And what he did was constantly set himself up against the monarchs, the establishment of that day. Byron's Childe Harold and Don Juan are very, very earthly, sensuous, even profane, and they are very unlike the poetry of the previous age. Shelley was also a revolutionary, like Byron, and he was a lover of Greek culture, which is known as Philhellenism. What Shelley does, he sublimates the concrete, what is there around us. He allows the imagination to soar to heights, extremes of flight, and he offers portraits of the purest of human aspirations, for instance, in his Ode to the Skylark. To illustrate again, Byron based his poem on the legend of Don Juan, but with a new perspective. He was not just repeating some narrative or some story or some folk tale that he had heard. He was giving it his own vision. He was giving it his own twist, if I may call it that. So it not only celebrates, but it represents and exhibits love and also the half demonic nature of people. So we must remember that people are made up not only of positives but also the negatives. We have all the time this conflict between various emotions, and Byron wished to show that through his poem Don Juan. And it has been called the epic of its time. It has roots deep in literary tradition. It involves itself with its own contemporary world at all levels, whether it's social, political, literary, or ideological. Shelley declared we are all Greeks. So you can imagine the extent of the admiration that he had for Greek civilization, for Greek art, for Greek literature. And into a Skylark, he transforms the flight of the Skylark into a kind of a magical experience. One never even thinks about a little bird flying in the sky. One just sees it and forgets it. But for Shelley, it became something much more powerful than a mere flight in the sky. What about Keats now? Loved Greek literature as well, loved Greek civilization. But at the same time, he also loved the sounds, the sights of spring and nature, which you can see in Ode to a Nightingale. However, in his epistle to John Hamilton Reynolds, he is a little confused and he wonders whether his vision is too far disconnected from reality. And he says, can imagination have some kind of a standard law? And I quote, he says, cannot imagination not refer to any standard law of either earth or heaven? In Ode to a Nightingale, he says, with beaded bubbles winking at the brim and purple-stained mouth, that I might drink and leave the world unseen and with thee fade away into the forest dim. What he does here is what Shelley does with the Skylark. He takes us beyond the sweet song of the nightingale into a different experience altogether. And the standard law that he talks about, whatever the standard law that Keats and his contemporaries followed, what they actually did was they restored the honor and the mystery of human beings. So even while they were disassociating themselves from everyday life, they were actually portraying some bits of reality. What they did see was they had a vision of a higher, a more sublime reality than what we ordinary mortals can see all the time. They could see this kind of sublimeness, sublimity in commonplace people and objects all around us, and also in these soaring flights of the imagination. The various forms of music that one can hear and that was composed at that point of time also illustrate certain other facets of the imagination. For Dryden and his contemporaries, nature meant more than what it does to us, and it included human nature. The Romantics' treatment of nature was revolutionary. In Wordsworth's The Daffodils, which is such a popular and such a common poem, the dance of the daffodils is connected in one single stroke to the dance of the waves in the backdrop of the flowers, and with that, to the entire cosmos.
I wandered, lonely as a cloud, floats high o'er vales and hills, when all at once I saw a crowd of golden daffodils. Beside the lake, beneath the trees, fluttering and dancing in the breeze, continuous as the stars that shine and twinkle on Milky Way. They stretched in never-ending line along the margin of the bay. 10,000 saw I at a glance, tossing their heads in sprightly dance. The waves beside them danced, oh, the sparkling waves in glee. The poet could not but be gay in such a jocund company. I gazed and gazed, but little thought what wealth the show to me had brought. For oft, when on my couch I lie, in vacant, pensive mood, they flash upon that inward eye, oh, the bliss of solitude. And then my heart with pleasure fills and dances with the daffodils.
And in the song of Wordsworth's Solitary Reaper, he again connects it to a long line of humankind. The song reminds him of old, unhappy, far-off things and battles long ago. So this ordinary song of the Solitary Reaper, this girl singing in the field, is heard against the whole backdrop of history and creation. And in the prelude, Wordsworth talks about how nature often reproved his childhood mischief.
The Solitary Reaper by William Wordsworth. Read for LibriVox.org by Chance Godwin. Behold her, single in the field, yon solitary Highland lass, reaping and singing by herself. Stop here or gently pass. Alone she cuts and binds the grain, and sings a melancholy strain. Oh, listen, for the vale profound is overflowing with the sound. No nightingale did ever chaunt more welcome notes to weary bands of travellers in some shady haunt among Arabian sands. A voice so thrilling ne'er was heard in springtime from the cuckoo bird, breaking the silence of the seas among the farthest Hebrides. Will no one tell me what she sings? Perhaps the plaintive numbers flow for old, unhappy, far-off things and battles long ago. Or is it some more humble lay, familiar matter of today, some natural sorrow, loss, or pain, that has been or may be again? Whate'er the theme, the maiden sang, as if her song could have no ending. I saw her singing at her work, and o'er the sickle bending. I listened motionless and still, and as I mounted up the hill, the music in my heart I bore long after it was heard no more.
So is it nature or is it people that the Romantics talk about? It's primarily about people and secondarily about nature. However, it is called nature poetry because nature is the measure of all things. It is the medium and also the object of the search. The poets of the classical age had urban society as the standard. The Romantics replaced it with nature. So it starts from the personal and goes on to the universal. As I just illustrated with the solitary reaper or the daffodils, Wordsworth starts off with the personal experience and then he soars out. It is like, if I can take a comparison from clicking a picture, you first zoom in and then you take a wide angle shot. So first you focus on something that's not so grand, and then slowly you widen the scope of it to include the entire universe. So there is something which they see which is beyond the obvious. A flower is not just a flower, a bird is not just a bird. So there is something in nature which is more to offer to the person who has the vision to see it. So it could be a reflection of God. There could be agents of supernatural beings, for example, in Coleridge. It could mean love and immortality, like it did for Keats. It could be freedom, reform, or revolution, or even improving the conditions of humankind, like it did for Shelley. And it could invoke familiar objects of nature, like the nightingale and the skylark, to express these ideas. Like it said of the nightingale, "Thou wast not born for death, immortal bird, no hungry generations tread thee down." So let us compare this with W.B. Yeats' invocation to the golden bird. The golden bird for W.B. Yeats is a fantasy, whereas Shelley's or Keats' bird is reality. "Hail to thee, blithe spirit," he says to the skylark, "bird thou never wert." So even if the skylark appears unreal to the poet, it gives us a message. And what is the message? We look before and after and pine for what is not. So even unreal experiences, the intensity, the dreams, the desires, they all communicate a message to humanity as far as the Romantic poets are concerned. Therefore, the wonder and awe towards nature is there in the work of the Romantics. To me, the meanest flower that blows can give thoughts that do often lie too deep for tears. The meanest flower, the simplest, the most ordinary flower can give rise to such ideas and emotions that goes deeper than tears. What a kind of an expression it is of the intensity of emotion that a human being can feel. People, nature, they are never viewed or evoked with the spirit, intensity and passion and the compelling force as has been done by the Romantics. And what they did was they evoked the infinite through the temporal. That is, they looked at what is fleeting, what is evanescent, what is melting away even as we speak, and they took that to convey something which is eternal, which is always there. So let us sum up. What happened? Why did the thoughts change? It was because society changed. And why did society change? Because the Industrial Revolution brought in a lot of changes in society. So writers brought in new themes. They tried to focus on emotion rather than reason. They used the familiar to convey higher universal truths. And nature was viewed as the standard against which to weigh all experience. And with that, we would conclude this discussion of a review of the Romantics. I'll come back to you later with another session of the same. Thank you.
Thank